Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to the slightly late February edition of Molten Music Monthly. I've just been busy, right? I had to run an entire show, so, you know, what can you do? So I'm a little bit behind this month, but hey, it may well be March, but this is still a roundup of all of the news and exciting things from the month of February 2025. I've lost the ability to say February. But anyway, it's cold. Sorry, I'm going to have to wear a jumper to hide my awesome shirt, but and never mind. I'm also completely knackered after nursing a Spotykach puppy through its first adventures into life with us. So our house and our lives have been turned upside down and nothing will ever be the same again. But that's what life is about, surely. It's all about the adventure, the things that happen, the stuff that's going on, and just giving life a go. That's this month's motto. Right, so what happened this month? Well, I think we should probably just dive straight in. Now, of course, I need to jump straight in with the fabulous festival of synthesizers, which was Synth East. Now, I've talked about this endlessly for the last while, so I'm not going to do that here. There are videos that tell you all about it on the YouTube channel. Performances, patch-offs, the expo, the film, the interview, the fabulous DIY workshops, the entire weekend rolled together in just synth heaven. That was that. Thoroughly successful, thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for coming. Let's move on. Bonboa Bacara. I think this could be. What is this? Well, it's a natty little acid generating machine. It's a sequencer, step sequencer, multi-channel step sequencer with automation, with lanes of stuff going on that you can change, not only accents but velocity, probability, other bits and pieces. It's a perfect playground for scattering patterns that fall into that genre of kind of acid house music. Of course, you can do whatever you like with it. You know, don't feel restricted by genre. Good Lord, no. You can stick in whatever you like. But its particular forte is the one where you create simple, like 16-step patterns, accent it all up, and go to town on your filters and bits and pieces. It's perfect for creating bass lines, perfect for creating melodies, and sort of everything, all the squelchiness in between. This is a plugin, it runs within your DAW, it has lots of randomization, some throws of the dice, probability, it has this temperature idea, whereas you increase the temperature so the diversity and the randomness spreads around and gets further away from your perhaps more ideal place. It looks like a lot of fun, and thank you Bonboa for sending it to me, but sadly it is Mac only, so I don't even get to play with it. But if that's your thing, go and check them out. Back to a bit more of Behringer then, because they keep squeezing stuff out, or at least teasing us with things that may or may not eventually arrive. It's really difficult to say. One could even say it's slightly frustrating, because they have this whole huge amount of stuff that's available now, and a huge amount of stuff that may come available down the line. It's this strange drip feeding of synthesizer adrenaline. I think maybe that's the thing. You get us on the hook with a couple of little synthesizers and then we just have to keep coming and keep coming. You feed us a little bit more and then we get a little bit more. Not me, I have to say, because I tend to review stuff, and so my access to gear tends to come through reviews, and Behringer are not particularly fond of that. For reasons no one can properly explain. So what have we seen this month? Well, we've seen the tiny little weeny JT Mini, which is an entire Jupiter. I mean, Jupiter 8 is an enormous synthesizer, and this is squeezed down into something about the size of a tobacco tin. It's a JT Mini. Sounds pretty awesome from the demos I've seen. It's like, wow, that's a great sounding thing. But I don't know whether the sense of it being an instrument really translates down to these tiny boxes. You know, I mean, we're used to tiny boxes. We've played with lots of relatively small, tiny, I've got tiny boxes and things. You know, that's all right. But the tiny box tends to bring a flavour of itself. Whereas if you're trying to model the flavour of something enormous, that's a different, it's sort of a little bit different. However, it's like 50 quid, it's a Jupiter 8 in a tiny little box. you can't really argue against that. Also this month Behringer showed us the Waves, which is a clone of the musical instrument Tides, which is essentially a modulation source. I think the front panels on these are actually looking better than they have done previously. It has a strange sort of anime sci-fi-esque kind of front panel, which I don't mind. But they still, I think, as all Behringer modules, suffer from the same fact that the patch points are not attached to the front plate. So they're a little bit floaty and feel like they might snap if you lean into them too hard. Next up, they have a Wasp filter. Not this one. This is the Dofer. The Dofer one, which has been brilliant. Brilliant for many, many years. Dofer made this excellent clone of the filter from the Wasp synthesizer. But now Behringer has kind of cloned the Dofer. I mean, they could have cloned the Wasp and then done something different with it. But they appear to have just completely copied exactly what this is. Which is okay. It's a few euros cheaper, but I would recommend perhaps going for the Dofer. It's just that little bit more solid. We've also seen a take on the Synthx. They had a demo of that going around. I think they're calling it, what are they calling it? The STX. People go crazy over the Elka Synthx. It's one of those synths that's a little bit out of my sphere of influence, I feel. I've never really played on one or been particularly aware of one, but I understand it to be an exciting synthesizer, so we have that to come. And they also showed us the RD78, which is a take on the CR78. If I got that round the right way, the Roland drum machine. The old Roland drum machine that came in a bit of a sort of a cabinet box thing with a couple of things and buttons on it. It gave you bossa novas and rumba rhythms and other bits and pieces, and of course was famously used on many records. The RD78 takes all of that sound, all of that idea, but sticks it in a very different box, and I think that's a shame. I mean, you know, I would love to be in Behringer board meetings where they decide this stuff, when they decide what it is they're going to do. Because, I mean, I know it sounds often like I'm sort of taking the piss out of Behringer all the time, and I kind of am a little bit, because to me their decisions, their design decisions, their trajectory through the way that they do things is just odd. It's just odd. It's just odd, so I tease them a little bit. That's essentially what it's about. It's a bit of teasing. And so with this one, they've decided to throw away the idea of making it look the same, to give you the same kind of functionality. They're putting it into something that looks much more like their TD3, and that's all right. They can do that. It's just, again, it's just slightly odd decisions. Why not clone the thing rather than clone a thing, or do it completely differently? This is some sort of halfway house where it looks a lot like it, but it actually isn't quite like it, but at the same time has the same sounds, although Anna Clapp, I think. And then they come up with something a little bit more sort of their own, which is the VC16, a vocoder in a Eurorack module. I don't think we've seen that before. I mean, you know, if you know me at all, you know that I just can't stand vocoders. They're just like, I have absolutely no use for one. But I like the idea that Behringer have decided to do something which is slightly different and interesting and brings that kind of flavour and sound to Eurorack that perhaps wasn't there before, at least in this form. It does have a carrier and a modulator all built in, or you can plug in a microphone, or you plug in a different carrier. And it has different modes and different bits and pieces to it. You know, it's a good attempt at an interesting module that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. Right, onto something completely different. This is SYNSO from China. They are the modular wing of a company called Sonic Seed, and they have sort of thrown out a bunch of interesting modules. The first one is the Touch Flower. It looks like it should be a desktop product. It looks like it should be in a little box, and the demo sort of demonstrates that, but actually it's a Eurorack module, and it throws this interesting flower-like, I suppose, controller, touchplate controller into your Eurorack. It is in fact an entire synthesizer. It has a whole bunch of waveforms inside, and you can create different sounds by moving and dragging your fingers across the petals, let's call them. It starts off with a root note in one, and a third and a fifth and a seventh, and you can have different scales, and you can work what those out and also change the sort of waveform that it's using. The demo is a little bit on the janky side. But it's certainly interesting. It could be a very interesting interlude within your set. So, you know, other stuff going on, and then as you're repatching or something around, you could fiddle your hand around on this and create interesting chordal sounds and happenings and stuff that comes out of that. Yes. I'm quite curious about that one, I have to say. They have 3 other modules as well, all of which look very similar, but do slightly different things. There's the step bass, there's a step tone, and there's a step drum. The step bass is a bass voice where it's got a filter built in and an envelope. The step tone appears to be possibly an oscillator / FM tone module, I think. It seems to have a bit of an FM thing going on, and certainly the sound demos would suggest that that's very much what it's about. And then the drum is a percussion source with noise and bits and pieces. But all 3 of them have this step sequencer down the side. 8 steps. It's a trigger sequencer, I think, running the envelope, essentially triggering the envelope into the VCA rather than creating pitch. I think because it has a 1 volt per octave input, I think you throw a sequence in and then you run that in sync with the 8 steps on the module itself. It's quite an interesting idea. I might not be explaining it very well because the explanation on the website is not that great either. But as far as I can work out, you've got your 8 triggers going through. You can actually lock all the parameters to each step so you can have it changing as it goes through, and all it really needs is a melody. I'd quite like to give those a go. I think it's an interesting idea. From China we move to Russia. The geopolitical landscape at the moment, I don't really know who we're supposed to be boycotting these days, so I'm just gonna go with it and understand that people and manufacturers aren't necessarily their governments. I mean, that's why we still buy from America after all. So what I'm talking about here is the Eternal Engine Mars. We've seen Eternal Engine before. They had this other big thing, sort of strange desktop, sort of mounted console with all these tubes sticking out the top. This is a similar idea, but it's in a much more boxy form. It looks like it could go into a rack. In fact, it looks a lot like Studio Electronics gear, I think. And it's slightly lopsided because on one side it's got this cutaway with these 4 tubes sticking out, because this is a polyphonic tube-based analog synthesizer. And then on the left side, it's got these wonderful Nixie tubes which show the patch numbers, I think. Probably. So it's really interesting to look at. I'm not sure why they needed the cutaway. You know, I think they could have unified that and put them perhaps behind a window or something, because it just has this slightly unnerving look about it. But anyway, by the by, what you have is 4 voices of tube-driven sound. So the tubes are in the analog signal path, and also the tube-driven filter and VCA. Everything is constantly being warmed through these vacuum tubes in order to give you this really fantastically gooey, warm and overdriven sound. And of course it has some extraordinary overdrive built in. It has a couple of envelopes, an LFO and separate vibrato, which I always think is quite interesting. Worth doing, I think, because it always feels like using an LFO for vibrato is a little bit of a waste, because you want to be doing perhaps greater things, which just to give something a little bit of a wobble. I think that's nice to have vibrato built in. It is only 4 voices, but I mean, these are pretty epic voices. It comes with a spare set of tubes, because I mean, I assume that these are all Soviet era tubes and liable to blow at any moment, which injects an element of risk into it, which is nice. But you can also replace the tubes with other ones, apparently, assuming that they fit the socket. But ultimately, it looks like a pretty epic synthesizer. Ignoring any further controversy, I'm now going to talk about Spitfire Labs and the Radiophonic Workshop. The reason being is that I adore the Radiophonic Workshop. So there we go. When I was a kid, that's where I wanted to work. I wanted to be in the Radiophonic Workshop because of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because of Doctor Who, because of tripods, because of all of these wonderful sounds. I used to have vinyl records of sound effects from the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. Yeah, I was definitely a fan. That was my trajectory. That's what I planned to do. But then life did other things. But the odd thing is that coming full circle now, many years later, that's essentially what I live in. I live in a place that makes crazy, weird and strange noises with all sorts of bits of gear. That is essentially what I wanted to do, and so I've made it. Anyway, Spitfire Labs has taken or delved or jumped or dived headfirst into the archives of the Radiophonic workshop over at Maida Vale Studios and dragged out everything they can find. They've sampled it and captured it. They even dragged out a few old folks who used to work there and forced them to bang things together in order to make some original content, which is nice. So it's a sound library full of interesting sounds, old synthesizers and a bunch of old vintage synths and bits and tape machines and noises and bowed bits and pieces. Interesting sounds brought together by these wonderful radiophonic artists who are able to produce a whole bunch of new sounds and wrapped up into the Spitfire Labs solar plugin, which gives you really easy control kind of over depth of stuff and then more intimate detail beneath it for people who really want to fiddle. There's nearly 30 gigabytes of crazy sounds, I should think, which is, I imagine, going to be immensely enjoyable. Right, it's warming up a bit in here now, which is good. So I am released. Right, moving on. Multiphonics is an often ignored software modular synthesizer from AAS Applied Acoustic Systems. It's very unified, it's very unique in the fact that it's all its own stuff. It doesn't have extra bits in like VCV Rack or Soft Tube Modular. It's very much running its own vibe, and that vibe is acoustic modelling, because that is what Applied Acoustics do best. So it has over 65 modules of all sorts of bits and pieces. I mean, all of the utilities are there, all the function generators, all the bits and pieces, but you have these wonderful sound sources which come from strikes and bows and resonances, along with physically moduled virtual analog and other bits and pieces. All the stuff that you can imagine packed into this Eurorack-esque modular front end. It's all done by patch cables, but they've now introduced, with this new CV-3 version 3, polyphony and MPE support and a bunch of new modules. And that includes things like FM. Judging by the demos, it sounds very different to most other things. I think that's perhaps its strength. It has an oddness about it. I think it's the physical modelling quality, in that it's not something that we really see. We see kind of vintage physical modelling in Eurorack, in that you're using things like Car Plus Strong, and you're using delay and low pass gates in order to kind of recreate organic sounds, whereas Applied Acoustics is using pure maths and those sorts of things in order to recreate the acoustic conditions in which sound occurs. So it does give it a very different flavour, and worth checking out if you've not seen it before. Another old favourite synth of mine is the Waverazor from MOK, Maximum Overkill. I think is what that stands for. Waverazor is an extraordinary piece of work, and it's old now. It's almost a decade old, I think, at least. But it has this interface that does strange things to your head because of its blue and its red and its darkness, and things stand out and act weirdly, and then you can interact with it. And essentially what you do is you take waveforms and you rip them apart. You rip them sideways or the other ways. It slices waveforms up to give you this very edgy, very dangerous and potentially traumatic sound experience. It has this sound that can just cut through anything and is immensely good fun. In version a while ago, because it's a very slow moving development on Waverazor, but several years ago they kind of opened it up and have provided you with access to every single bit behind the scenes, which is totally and absolutely baffling and intense. But if you're really into how you completely rework waveforms and sounds and want to get gooey into all of that sort of stuff, then you have that power in the editor behind it. I've not really gotten particularly deep with it because I just enjoy the front end. I think the front end is a beautiful piece of work. So I'd like to stay there. That's where I feel it's the most creative. Anyway, there's a new version, 2.8. And that essentially brings in over 30 new waveforms, a whole bank of new sounds and new ideas. It brings in a pitch shifting delay, harmonic modulations, and all sorts of new ways of poking and pushing the segments and bits and pieces about. Whatever you do though, don't listen to the demo that I've got behind, because with the greatest of respect to everybody involved, I don't think it really captures what Waverazor is about. There are some old demos. Go and listen to those demos from like 6 to 8 years ago, which are fantastic. I might have to do one myself simply because just listening to it going, oh no, this is not what I believe Waverazor to be about. But hey, I mean, they're showing new things and new directions that it's going in, as opposed to perhaps the same old, which is essentially what I'm all about. Back in November, I covered the Audrey 2, the Horrorscape synthesizer from Synthux Academy, and they sent me one, and I have it over there, and I've promised to build it many times. I still haven't quite yet. It is absolutely really high on my priority list. I'm just trying to get to it. I plan to build it. The plan is at the moment this week, but I've probably said that for the last 2 months. But it definitely is a high priority because Synthux Academy makes some really interesting stuff based on this sort of synthesizer building platform, and they have more stuff to come. The new one is some kind of a looper. They're calling it Spotykach. Spotykach. I don't know. Spotykach. So catch. Something like that. They're calling it anyway. It doesn't matter what it's called. What's important is that you have this dual looping system within this synthesizer, where each side can either be an effect processor like a delay, it can be a looper, or it can be a slicer. And so you can use these and modulate and crossfade between one and the other, or go from one to the other and back to the other. One imagines. At the moment, it's just a prototype, and Synthux Academy are out there going, yeah, we want to see how you feel about this. We want to see what your reaction is to what can we change, what can we adjust, this, that, and the other. But what they've kind of neglected to do is give us some good demos of it functioning. Between gathering this information and doing this video, they have actually now released a sound demo, but the sound demo is still only has a tiny little bit of it where you're not got the geezer talking over the top. Now, I'm a fine one to talk. I talk all over all of my videos, but I also like to leave good gaps, minutes, where we're demoing the product and you're hearing the sounds and things develop. Whereas your man is always talking. And so they need to put out a bit more of a focused sound demo, I think. At least I think. But then I have no position to say anything because I still haven't built the Audrey 2, as I said that I would. So I will get on with that. I promise I will get on with that. But yeah, give us more demos. We need more demos of what is actually going on, because it looks really interesting. All the touch bits around the outside, fantastic. The interactivity, the looping, the grabbing of stuff, and then generating that into things, really potentially a fascinating product, if only I could pronounce it properly. Erica Synths has released more Hexinverter stuff. This time it's a whole bunch of percussion. We had the Rimshot a little while ago, but now we have the Mutant bass drum, Mutant hi-hats, Mutant clap, and Mutant snare. So you now have an entire drum kit of interesting reborn Hexinverter modules built by Erica Synths. They all look very similar. They seem like they're cut from the same cloth. All of the sounds are modelled on 808 or 909 circuits. But of course they are exploded in functionality and deeper control. Every now and again, Make Noise release something. They take their time. They sit back and they mull these things over. I think they drink a lot of coffee. They probably go on a retreat somewhere for 6 months, say, go and work with the poor in another country somewhere else, and then come back and produce another module. And so we have one. This is called the Multimod, and it's actually very on trend. There's a lot of these sorts of modules coming about, modules where you put one thing in, you get many things out, or you're sort of controlling many things from one thing. It's definitely a vibe we have going on at the moment. I've got all sorts of modules which seem to do a very similar thing, but the one from Make Noise, of course, is undoubtedly deeper and more baffling than you will ever find anywhere else. But Sarah Bell Reid has done a fantastic video on it, which really does demonstrate the incredible power of the Multimod. What is it? Stick something in the top, like an LFO, you get 8 LFOs out the bottom. What's interesting about that is it's not just a multiple, there's actually sampling and processing going on. So you have one knob that you can turn, and the outputs will slowly go out of phase. So they'll start to start to modulate differently. So rather than all following the same thing, each one gets delayed a little bit, and so you get this sort of swimming effect of modulation going through your system. Another option is to change the speed or the timing of each one. So you've got fast modulations and slower modulations. And what then becomes interesting about that is that you don't have to just stick in an LFO or a random input to create different random outputs or different modulation outputs. You could stick in audio. And Sarah does this brilliant demo of singing into the thing where you get these different shifting pitches and speeds, and it creates this extraordinary sort of cascade of harmony going on that I had not really considered getting out of a modulation device. Really fascinating. But I totally get what it is that's interesting. I have a modulation device like, for instance, the DiffKid Oct, where you've got all these different but related LFOs going on. And this is similar to that, but then you can then push them apart, sort of spread them out so they're doing different things and then bring them in focus back together. Really, really interesting. And apparently this is based on a new universal synthesizer platform, which would suggest that Make Noise are perhaps going to release a whole raft of different modules based on this particular platform, which could get interesting. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Make Noise have a very unique and inspirational approach to modular, and it's fascinating. On the one hand, it's usually too much for me. I don't have much Make Noise stuff because it tends to be, it has a way of working that I just don't feel I have the time to explore at this time. But it's beautiful stuff. I love the way that it relates to each other and comes together, and I hear a lot of fantastic things that people are doing with those modules. It's just not something that I've really fully entered into myself. But this one is definitely intriguing, and I can see how I could easily use it to interesting effect within my own rack. The Kaona Sisyphus. Now, ignoring the fact that it does sound like a rather dreadful disease, this is a granular system oscillator that's absolutely dripping with filters. It looks amazing. The lights, the LED, all the rings around all of the knobs, the lit up behind the panel, what sort of filter you're on, has all of these filters inside. The idea is that it extracts, you stick some audio in and it pulls grains out, which are then can be filtered directly within the module to create these very interesting grains and explorations through segmented audio. You can mess around with the length and the density, the intervals, you can create patterns and inject probability. And all the while, each of the grains is taken on the character of your chosen filter. Now, it's very fascinating to read about and to kind of look at, but the sound demos at the moment are not really, for me at least, but there seems to be a bit of a theme this month. I think perhaps because my head's been so full of Synth East, I just ain't getting it. My head's either too full, or maybe my brain has gone smooth. I don't know, but I'm not getting it very well this month. Apologies to all of the lovely manufacturers who try really hard, because I do appreciate that these are your babies, that these are products that you've poured yourself into, and here's me just like, I don't know, I mean no disrespect at all. I'm just talking about what I see and talking about the gear because I find that interesting. And you just need to do what you're doing, and hopefully I can encourage you along the way. So with this one, Kaona, I would encourage you to do a more explicit sound demo so we can actually hear what's happening, because I'm not sure I could really work it out. And also there's lots of distortion in the video, and I don't think you're showing yourself in your finest light. So I would highly recommend, and this is advice out to any modular manufacturer out there, because I know that often you're a one-person deal or a two-person outfit, and everything takes time and everything is a lot. But it is massively worthwhile to put aside some time for your video demos. Just put in a little bit more effort. Don't let the output distort. Try to give it time to develop. Don't be afraid of doing a long video, and just let things happen. Show us what it is that it's going to do. Simply, straightforwardly, and don't talk over all of it. Or, you know, send it to me and I'll forget to do it for a couple of months and then eventually get around to it. I mean, that's always a possibility. I am definitely open to that. And I do promise to get much, much better and faster at turning around modules that people send to me. There's always that possibility that it's going to be absolutely awesome and that I can demonstrate that as best I can. Moving on to another module that has absolutely no sound demos whatsoever, and that is the PPG W2.2x4. I don't know. What this is, right? This is Liquid Sky Devices, and they've somehow managed to license from PPG the original sound set of wavetables and have built a dual oscillator module in order to house them and bring them into your Eurorack. I mean, I guess we could just look at demos of the old PPG Wave. I mean, I guess that's a possibility. Also, coincidentally, you could listen to the Behringer Wave as well, because that has probably the same sound set. But anyway, this is a rather chunky module that can fit into Eurorack, and it has a main oscillator and it has a sub oscillator. Now, this had me scratching my chin for a little while because it kept talking about it being a dual oscillator VCO. But on the front panel you've got main and you've got sub. Now, sub in Eurorack usually refers to a octave below or 2 octaves below waveform that's derived from the original oscillator. So it's not actually a separate independent thing. It's actually it's part of that one oscillation. So this talks about it being a dual oscillator, but then also having a sub, and that sub seems to be on the front panel. What I think is going on here is the sub is not a sub in what we normally expect that to be. It's a sub as in it's a subordinate oscillator to the main oscillator. Are you with me? So you have your main oscillator, then you have this sub oscillator, which is essentially either modulating or running with that in sync. It's just the wrong name for it. I mean, maybe that's how it was named in the PPG. I don't know. I don't have one to hand to check. I'm sure you can tell me. You can tell me in the comments. Anyway, so it has all of the waveforms, all of the wavetables, should I say, from the original. It's also got an overdrive built in. It looks absolutely the part, I have to say, in that horrible blue colour that for some reason PPG chose. But thankfully, there's also a limited edition black version. Also, that would be nice, I think. Be interesting to try out. I mean, there are no sound demos, there are no videos. It looks very conceptual at the moment, but heck, they're taking pre-orders, so who knows, that might turn up. Momo Muller is someone who has been creating editors for synthesizers for a long, long time. It's almost as if whenever a new synth comes out, a companion app will turn up from Momo and will be exactly what you need to get the most out of your synth. What we're talking about, essentially what Momo does is produces a MIDI controller plugin for your synth. So whatever synth you've got, they create a front end for it that you can map to all of the bits. It's all pre-mapped to all of the CC numbers and allows you to do all of your automation and bits and pieces easily and simply within your DAW. They're great time-saving devices, very, very useful utilities. Now, Momo has just released what they're calling a universal editor. So it's for controlling everything. And while your DAW can already do that, this just makes things very, very simple. So you have your hardware controller, you turn a knob, press a button in the editor, and it learns that knob. Great, so far so good. That's very, very common. But then it has another button, and you turn the destination knob on your hardware synth, press this other button, and it learns that one too, which is kind of clever and yet completely obvious to the point of why have we never done that before? It makes you think. So then you've instantly got this connection between your hardware controller that you're trying to use and your hardware synthesizer. And you can do that for all the bits and then save it, and you've essentially building up a library of maps from your hardware controller to whatever synthesizer you want to use. Just brilliant. Because you spend no end of time learning, MIDI learning and setting things up and all that kind of thing. Well, if anything like me, you never have anything together long enough for that to make any sense. But this is the sort of thing that if you have hardware that you use all the time, that you could create this library of editors for yourself within this little piece of software, and you're good to go. It's great. And it only costs like a handful of euros, like €7 or something like that. Fantastic work. The Vienna Symphonic Library is enormous. It's a huge library of extraordinary orchestral sounds. I remember, back in the day, I used to sell multiple computers that would run the VSL library across a network, because that's what you needed to do in order to get the best polyphony and the best performance out of it. I'm sure things are a little bit easier these days. But anyway, VSL have created a sort of a simpler orchestra for those of us who don't really want to get absolutely into the nuts and bolts of every breath and squeak and fart and noise from every instrument within a 64-piece orchestra. Some of us just don't have the time for that. And so VSL created this smart orchestra, which works much more within a keyboard paradigm and allows you to quickly and easily create orchestral parts. This is now version 2. It's kind of really brought it together, and it now looks like a pretty phenomenal way of bringing an orchestral sound, or a hybrid orchestral sound, to your DAW and to your music production. From what I can gather, you have your piano keyboard, and then spread across that at one end, or the left side rather, you have kind of the orchestra, and then at the top end you have solo instruments, and you can swap between them with key switches down on one side and sort of play orchestral bits. You've got choir, woodwinds, strings, brass, and at the top end you could have your solo, solo flute, solo violin, solo this, that and the other going on here, and you can play it as an entity, and that just makes everything work far quicker and far more integrated. If you're looking to get big orchestral sounds without having to do layer upon layer and track upon track of stuff, you can do it kind of all in one hit. You can mix between the levels of the different groups and areas within the orchestra and change between different solos, and it all works rather swimmingly. There's new stuff as well, like something called Smart Spheres and Smart Hits. Smart Hits, pop hits maybe. Who knows? As well as a whole bunch of new solo instruments. So it's really quite a thing, and is impressive to see and impressive to play, and potentially is the easiest way to introduce some orchestral sounds into your rig. And finally, I have another gig. I have another gig. It's very exciting. Yes, this is at Epic Studios in the Green Room. It's on April the 6th. It's an afternoon from 4:30 till 7. So, what else are you going to be doing on a Sunday evening? It's a perfect thing to come along to. It's completely free to just chill out, relax, have a beer maybe before going on to dinner somewhere else, and to immerse yourself in some electronic music. Could be fantastic. It's not just me, it's a whole bunch of us. Most of them, in fact, are alumni from Synth East or EMOM. We have Hardwired, we have a Vector in Hilbert Space, we have Abominable. And then we have Chris Adante and Craig Billingham, who I've not come across before. So that's going to be interesting. So it's a whole group of us spanning a couple of hours on a Sunday evening at the Epic Studios, April the 6th. Put it in your diary. Come along. It's completely free. It should be fun. I'm massively looking forward to it. I'm a little bit going to have to think about how I'm going to change my patch from Synth East. Am I going to change it? Am I going to keep it the same? Am I going to keep rocking the same thing, or should I do something completely different? I don't know. And no one will know until we get there. So that's it. I feel it's been a bit of a weird one this month. I feel I've been talking slightly craziness, I'm overtired, I would say, and slightly craggy, feel out of touch with everything because I've had such a crazy month, whether it's been Synth East, whether it's been the flipping puppy. It's just been been a bit bonkers. But now I've got to get back to the house because I've got to throw dinner together. There's people coming around to see the puppy, of course, and I need to go and do that. No live stream tonight. I'm not going to be getting this done today because I'm shooting this on Sunday morning, and there's no way I'm going to get this finished today, but who knows. So no plans for a live stream this time around, but who knows, I might just pull one out of the air at some point. But otherwise I will see you next month, and in the meantime, go make some tunes.